This is a Pagani Huayra, and it is, quite simply, one of the coolest cars ever made. And that's obvious the moment you first take a look at it. Yes, this one is worth something close to $3 million, but it is also simply stunning. And as you go through the details and the cool quirks and features, it becomes even more stunning. Today, I'm going to do just that. First, a little overview, and I'm going to start with Pagani, the company. Now, Pagani was founded by Horacio Pagani, who worked for Lamborghini but left in the 1990s in order to start his own firm. Pagani's first car came out in 1999. It was called the Zonda, and it debuted to widespread acclaim for its crazy styling and its insane performance.
And then came the Huayra. This car came out in 2011, 2012. This particular one is a 2014 model, and it was updated in 2016 with the Tempesta package. Pagani Huayra Tempesta. It's a special name for a special car, and indeed this is a very special car. It uses a turbocharged V12 borrowed from Mercedes-AMG with 730 horsepower and 740 pound-feet of torque.
It'll do 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds, and it'll hit a top speed of around 240 miles an hour, which makes it one of the fastest cars on the planet. Pagani made only 100 coupe models like this one for the entire world. These days production has stopped, and they're now making an open-top Huayra Roadster version. When this car was new back in 2014, the original sticker price was just under $2 million, but these days the market price for this car is hovering just below $3 million. I've borrowed this Huayra from a viewer here in Southern California, and you can follow him on Instagram. His Instagram handle is JCHWA. It is flashing on the screen right now, and you totally should follow him on Instagram because, I mean, the man's got a Pagani Huayra, so you know he's got some interesting stuff going on. The owner of this car, he sent me an email and he says, "Hey, why don't you come up and film a video with my Pagani?" And I was like, yeah, and so here I am. Anyway, today I'm going to show you around the Huayra, and I'm going to show you all of the interesting quirks and cool features of one of the most amazing cars in existence. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the Huayra, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of the most expensive cars currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now I'm going to start the quirks and features with my favorite quirk of this entire car, and that would be the key. First off, this is the key. Yes, that's right. This is what the key looks like. It is an aluminum piece in the shape of a car. Not just any car, of course, in the shape of a Huayra. And you will notice that there aren't any, key things on it. Well, you see, the key is more than just what meets the eye at first. First off, it comes apart. You can pull it apart in the middle. These two little sections clip onto each other with a magnet. When you pull it apart, obviously, you can see the key place. It looks like a key in a normal car, and that's what you stick into the ignition. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here because where exactly are the lock and unlock buttons? Well, they're underneath the whole car assembly thing. You can see lock is red, unlock is green. You push them to lock and unlock the doors, just like in a normal car. Also on the bottom of the key, you can see that's where the regular cut key is for this car. Just in case your normal electronic key goes out and you have to, for some reason, use an old-fashioned manual style key, you can do that. You just kind of swing it out, and then you can stick it in the car and open the doors if you need to. But none of that stuff is the coolest thing about the key. The coolest thing about the key comes when you put it in the ignition and turn the car on. There is no push button start in this car. Instead, they have something way cooler. Check this out. The ignition is located in the middle. In the middle is center control stack at the bottom. And when you put the key in and turn it, basically you turn it so that the car portion of the key is then facing forward and driving in the same direction that you are driving. The ignition is set up so the key actually looks like a Pagani Huayra driving down the road while you're in your Pagani Huayra driving down the road, and that is just about the coolest thing ever. But you may be wondering, well, okay, that's the back half of the car, but what happens to the front half of the car? Well, of course, Pagani thought of that because they thought of everything for this car. There's actually a little spot where you can stick the front half of your car-shaped key while you're driving along. That also goes right in the center console, so you can look at both halves of your Pagani Huayra key while you're driving your Pagani Huayra, and that is just super cool. Another cool fact about the key is that the key comes in this cool special box you get from Pagani. You can see there are two little cutouts in the box for where the key goes. You get two keys with each car, and the box itself is signed by Horacio Pagani. Now also check out this other box behind the key box. That you can see there's like a Huayra logo in it. It turns out when they make a Huayra, the logo in back that says Huayra is created from one solid block of aluminum. They cut the part that says Huayra out, they stick it on the car, and you get to keep the solid block of aluminum that the other part came out of, and they present that to you in a little box just like the key box, and Horacio Pagani signs that as well. And that is just so cool. Amazing presentation, incredible attention to detail. And attention to detail is basically the theme of this car because everything in this car is just perfect. The materials are wonderful, the stitching, every single thing they use has been thought through. Everything that you can see, and even some things that you can't, just beautiful.
For example, this car has 1,400 titanium bolts throughout it, all tightened ever so perfectly, but that's not the crazy thing. The crazy thing is they all say Pagani on them in the littlest, most perfect font. Amazing attention to detail.
And it goes so far beyond that. As you can see on the door sill, the Pagani logo comes in this sort of elongated oval, and that oval is kind of placed all throughout the interior in a bunch of different places. For example, if you look at the steering wheel, you will see the oval. Also, if you look at the gauge cluster, you will see the same oval logo. Same thing with the switches above the infotainment screen, and in the infotainment screen, the oval is placed. You can see, for example, here I'm adjusting the bass and treble in little tiny ovals. And you will see that Pagani oval logo carried throughout the interior in various different places if you look closely for it. It's very cool. But I don't want to get ahead of myself here because there's a lot to show you, and I want to show you everything individually because the details are all just amazing. I'm going to start with the gauge cluster, or in this car it'd be better to say the dials because that's a better description of what they are. They're this beautiful aluminum. Just look at them. They're gorgeous. Pagani says they're made by a firm that does Swiss watches, and you can tell they have that kind of precision and that look to them. Now the dial, starting on the left, you have the engine temperature dial, and then moving over from that you have the fuel gauge, not all that unusual. Next up there's the tachometer, and then to the right of that you have the speedometer, and then finally over on the right you have oil pressure and oil temperature. The same gauges you'd find in a normal car, just far more beautiful. Another interesting item in that vicinity, to the left of the dials and to the left of the steering wheel, you have two interesting items. One is there's a little rounded storage area over there for maybe your vehicle registration or something else. It's a nice little storage pocket. You don't usually get extra storage compartments from supercars, so that's a pretty cool thing. Another item you'll find over there is this nice aluminum lever. You may be wondering, what exactly does this thing do? Well, that's actually the tilt steering wheel lever. You pull it and it tilts the steering column and also the gauges, since it's all one piece. So if you need a little bit more room for your knees, you can put that up or down if you want it to be closer to you, and the whole thing moves at once. Now, a couple of other interesting things in the vicinity of the dials. One is that button over to the far left in the dials, that's the axle lifter. If you press that, the front of the car, the front axle lifts up so that the car has more room to clear kind of like driveways where it might scrape. Obviously this is a fairly low car, so that is an important feature, and you can see how it's working now. The other cool thing about the gauge cluster is that above everything you can see there's this little dial that shows a bunch of numbers. That is not the odometer. That's the engine hours, just like on an airplane. A lot of stuff in this car is supposed to be inspired by aviation, airplanes, beautiful airplanes from the old days, and engine hours is one of those things. And so that is featured at the top of the gauge cluster prominently for all to see how long your engine has been running. Kind of cool. Now, moving down from the gauge cluster, I want to talk about the steering wheel, which has a couple of interesting items on it. Starting on the left, you can see there is a little arrow over there. That would be the left turn signal, and indeed the left and right turn signals are on the steering wheel rather than on stalks coming off of the steering wheel like in most other cars. The theory there is you're on a racetrack, you don't want to have to move your hands to reach anything. They put it right there on the wheel. And that same theory is carried through to various other items. You can see the lights are also located on the steering wheel, and so are the windshield wipers. The upper right washes the windshield. You can get a little windshield washer squirt on the windshield. Other interesting items on the steering wheel. Over on the right, you can see a button marked ESC off. If you push that button, it takes you from normal mode and puts you into sport mode. If you push that button and hold it down, here's a little Pagani Huayra Easter egg. It actually puts you in sort of like an ultra sport mode, like a track mode. It turns off ESC and it lowers the front of the car just a little bit, but you have to hold it down to get into that mode. And also you have the horn on the steering wheel, not in the center of the wheel, but rather in little thumb pads on the top right and top left of the steering wheel. And since I know you're wondering, here's how the horn in a Pagani Huayra sounds. Now, the final button on the steering wheel is a little page, and it's designed to scroll through the pages in the screen in the center of the gauge cluster. Now, this screen isn't particularly quirky or noteworthy, but it's worth mentioning what it has. One screen shows your tire pressures, and also it shows your maximum Gs and your maximum speed. Another screen shows your navigation system. And then finally, the last screen just shows some typical averages like you'd get in a normal car. It also shows your range, that sort of thing. Nothing particularly unusual in that center screen. Now, next I want to talk about simply getting in the Huayra, because the doors are rather unusual. Now, in order to open the door, you stick your hand inside this little cubby that's sort of reserved for opening the door, and there's no door handle in this car. Instead, it's this aluminum kind of switch hanging on the door. You flip it and then it opens up, and then the doors are gull-wing doors, obviously, and this is how they look when they're open. They're very, very cool. Now, once you get inside, the doors are hanging pretty far up there, and it's actually kind of a challenge to close them. You have to reach pretty far up, and you reach this little leather door hoop and you pull it closed, and that's how you get the doors closed. Now, it's worth noting, with the door open, you can see one of my favorite attention to detail features in this car, and that would be this little aluminum plaque in the door sill that sort of goes through the fact that the car conforms to motor vehicle standards. It goes through the gross vehicle weight, the tire size. Now, in a lot of cars, that's just like a little sticker they stick on in production. In this car, it is this beautiful aluminum plaque, and it's absolutely gorgeous because everything is gorgeous in this car, even a little label that says that it conforms to motor vehicle standards. Now, I'm going to come back to the doors in a minute because there are a lot of other door-related quirks worth noting, but first I want to move on to another plaque that's worth mentioning, and that would be the one between the seats. Now, each Huayra can be named by its owner. The owner of this one has named it the Huayra Senza Tempo, and they placed that name on this little plaque, which also shows that it is Huayra number 65 of 100. The plaque also includes Horacio Pagani's signature and sort of a side view of the car. It is a very cool little plaque in between the seats. Also very cool in between the seats, you can see there's this little center storage area, and on top of that there's this leather strap. This leather strap has contrasting stitching in the colors of the Italian flag. The owner of this car customized it that way, and it is a very cool look. Now, next up in the center console of this car, I want to talk about the window switches. Those would be the little silver switches that stick up next to the parking brake. They're unlabeled. Obviously, the one on the left controls the left window, right controls the right window. Now, you'll notice that that same design is what you use to open the door. It's supposed to be like an old toggle switch for something in an old airplane, and that theme is sort of carried through to a lot of different things, starting with the door and moving on to the window switches. Now, in between the window switches, you have just a parking brake. It actually operates just like a normal parking brake. There's nothing particularly unusual about it. It is possibly the only item in the entire car that's normal. Certainly not normal is next in line in the center console, and that would be the shifter. Now, this car uses a 7-speed sequential manual transmission, not a dual clutch like most modern supercars. According to Pagani, they looked at putting a dual clutch in this car, but at the time this car came out back in 2012, a dual clutch would have been considerably heavier, about 150 pounds, which Pagani says would have negated the benefit of having the quicker shift. So this car has a sequential manual, and the transmission lever is just about the coolest thing in the world. Now, it's redundant. The paddle shifters can do everything that the transmission lever in the middle can do, but just look at how cool this thing is. First off, gear changes. You pull it down for an upshift, push it up for a downshift, and the sound it makes and the feel is just like an old school gated shifter in a Ferrari. Who says that an automatic transmission can't feel every bit as good and as satisfying when you make a shift as a manual? In this car, it really does. And you can see that as you make shifts, you can actually see the exposed linkage underneath the shift lever doing whatever you tell it to do, just like in a spiker. And that is a really, really cool look. One other cool thing about the shifter is that there is a light hidden behind the shifter, sort of amongst the linkage, and that light actually projects forward. So when you're driving this car at night, it shines on the linkage so you can see it operating every time it changes gears, even if it's dark out, and that is a pretty cool feature. Now, next I want to talk about the sun visor. The sun visor is leather. It is curved to the exact contour of the ceiling of this car, and it is very beautiful. Although not particularly noteworthy, it just comes down and is a sun visor. It is worth noting, though, the hinges on the sun visor are gorgeous. This is something you will never look at, never see. You can only see them through the windshield on the outside of the car, but Pagani still didn't cheap out on it. They're beautiful. And speaking of things that Pagani didn't cheap out on, how about the pedals? Take a look at these. They are also beautiful aluminum, no surprise. On the right, you have the accelerator pedal as usual, and that has an oval shape, just like so many other things. On the left, you have the brake pedal, and it looks like a wheel or something like that. I'm not really sure. Again, these are things that nobody will really look at all that often, but they still had to make them beautiful. And they did. And since we're in the driver's floor area, it's worth noting that this car doesn't bother with like lamb's wool floor mats. Instead, you just get these gorgeous leather mats on the bottom with the Pagani logo on them and with stitching. Beautiful leather floor mats in this car. You don't see that in a lot of other vehicles. Next up, another interesting item in the interior is on the ceiling, and that would be the rear view mirror. You can see it is just incredibly small. It is also the usual oval shape of everything else, but it's really, really tiny. Interestingly, it's kind of perfect size for the small back window, but nonetheless, it is very small. Now, also up there is one of the coolest things in the entire car, and that would be the two reading lights in the interior that flank the launch control. Just look at this binnacle. It looks so cool. And once again, it looks like it's inspired by an old-time airplane. Now, when you go to turn on the lights, it is a toggle switch. You turn it on, and it really feels like you are activating some very important item in an old airplane. It is the single coolest light switch I have ever seen in any application, car or otherwise, in my entire life. Very cool. But then you have launch control in the middle. Now, launch control, it looks like you have to pull it up and then press something, but actually it's just a button. You push it, that activates launch control, and then you can do a crazy launch control start. Now, next up, moving down and back to the center control stack, I want to talk about the climate controls, because the climate controls in this car are just so cool. Take a look at them. Pagani says they are inspired by a clarinet, the musical instrument, and you can kind of get that feeling. They look like clarinet keys when you press them. Now, as you can see, they're all the same usual buttons you'd get in a normal car. You have the fan speed on the left, where the air is coming out, auto, recirculating, and then you can change the temperature with the two clarinet keys on the right. It's all fairly standard, except it just looks way more beautiful and cool and special than it does in your normal car. Right in the middle of all that, above the ignition, that would be the stereo volume control, which also has sort of an old-time aircraft look to it. Now, also in the center control stack at the top, you can see there are toggle switches for 5 different items. Once again, they're supposed to resemble an old-time airplane, and they look so cool. On the left, you have the rear defroster, then you have the fog lights. Now, the hazard lights is the coolest. It's in the middle, and to turn on, you actually pull out this switch, and then the hazard lights turns on. It's like an old-time car. I think that is so cool. And then to the right, you have the door lock, and then you have the wing. Now, you may be wondering what exactly the wings toggle switch does. Well, this car doesn't have a giant rear wing on the back like some supercars. Instead, it has little flaps. And the flaps come up when the car is going around a corner, when it's braking hard. They go down when the car is accelerating fast. And those flaps, Pagani calls them wings. Now, if you press the wings button, the car will do a wing check to make sure that they are operating properly. And they do a little dance when you press that button. Take a look at what happens when you push it. Now, in normal operation, the wings just kind of go up and down when necessary to provide more downforce or more drag when you're braking to optimize your driving experience. Now, one final item worth mentioning in the center control stack would be at the very bottom of everything below the actual control stack. You can see there's a cigarette lighter in there and an ashtray, because this is a European car and it's kind of still a European thing that some people want to smoke in their cars, so it's in there just in case you want to smoke in your Huayra. Now, next up, I want to talk about the seats. Now, the big question everybody always has when they see one of these is, what is that giant circle in the middle of the seat bottom? Well, it turns out that is a height adjustment. As you twist that little dial, the seat will raise and lower. It's actually not all that much mystery. It's just a little seat height adjustment. Now, in addition to the hole in the middle that adjusts the height, the seat also has some other adjustments. There's a bar in the front that moves the seat forward or backwards, just like in most other cars. And then there's a little lever on the side you can use to adjust the position of the backrest. Not all that surprising. More surprising to me is the fact that there's also a huge hole in the back of the seats. You can see it kind of goes from the headrest to the middle of the seat. It's just kind of a cool looking seat hole. You can see there's another item behind the seats right now, and that would be fitted luggage. This car has specially designed luggage that is intended to go right behind the seats. Obviously, there's not a lot of storage space in this vehicle, and there is no trunk, so any little storage you can get is good, and that's where that specially designed fitted luggage comes in. Now, the other thing that you can see behind the seats there are these giant speakers. In fact, there are 3 of them. They're absolutely huge, and they're back there obviously to enhance your radio sound experience. There's also a giant speaker located on the door, and so now we must return to the door for a few more interesting door quirks. Now, maybe the biggest quirk of the doors is the fact that it has a roof that is a window. So in your car, you have a roof, maybe you have a sunroof. In this car, your door has a roof, and that roof is glass, and you can see out of it. That is a pretty cool touch. But that isn't the only interesting and cool touch of the door, obviously. The door latches on the inside are very cool. It's this little red latch that's shaped just like the latch on the outside, and just like the power window controls like an old airplane. You pull it, it says door open, and then you can push the door up, and the door opens. It's as simple as that. And another interesting item on the door panel, sort of at the base of the door panel in the front, that would be the emergency door unlocker. Just in case the regular door unlocking system isn't working, there is a secondary way to unlock the doors. You pull it, and I guess it unlocks the doors so you can get out. Now, next up, moving back into the interior and over onto the passenger side, I want to talk about the airbag. Now, United States regulations mandate that all new cars sold here must have dual airbags, and Pagani complies with that regulation. In Europe, they don't have to have dual airbags, and so European models don't have this big sort of box over on the passenger side like this car does. That box contains the airbag. Now, below the airbag, you can see that this car actually has a glove box. That's not something you would necessarily really expect from a supercar, especially at this level, but indeed it has a glove box. And in that glove box, you can see the owner's manual contained in this beautiful leather-wrapped pouch that is just absolutely gorgeous. Now, the owner's manual in a Pagani Huayra, there's not that many details out there about this car. There's just not very many of these, and so not much has been published about the owner's manual in a Huayra. I took a look through it today, and I gotta tell you, it's actually pretty professional. There's nothing in there that I find to be especially weird or strange or objectionable. I will say Horacio Pagani signed it, which is a nice personal touch. They don't build that many of these, so I bet he signs them all, which is kind of cool. One thing I did find that's kind of quirky in the owner's manual, on page 39, reads, "Do not lock anyone inside the vehicle. In an emergency, should it become too cold or too hot, serious injury or death could result." Don't lock anyone on your Huayra. They might die. I guess I could imagine seeing that warning in a Toyota owner's manual, which is kind of weird to imagine it in a Pagani owner's manual. Now, next up, we move on to the outside of the Huayra, where I first want to cover the engine compartment. Now, as you can see, if you look at it from here, there is a leather strap that is exposed sort of underneath the door and what appears to be holding the engine compartment closed. Actually, it's not quite holding the engine compartment closed. You open the door and you can see that you do have to undo that leather strap in order to get to the engine compartment, but there's also these little red tabs that you pull up that are actual locks that lock you the engine compartment from opening up, and those leather straps are mostly just decorative. It is worth noting, though, that on the side of the buckle for the leather strap, there's a little oval with the Pagani logo. Again, really cool attention to detail. But anyway, back to opening up the engine cover. Now, once you've undone those leather straps, as I have, and once you've unlocked the little red latches to keep it in place, as I have, it becomes a one-person job, and you can open it by yourself, as I'll demonstrate in a second. But while I'm opening it, I want you to watch how close it gets to the doors, and yet how it doesn't hit them. Take a look. And you can see I am opening it by myself, and Pagani has designed it in a way that even though the doors are completely open, you can still open the engine cover, which is good because you don't want to have the doors open, go to open the engine cover, forget, and then damage something. Now, once we have the engine cover open, you can see that this is one of the coolest angles in the entire car, just because the engine cover, when it's open, it's all bodywork, and when it moves away, you basically are left with just the engine, the exhaust, the structure of the vehicle, and it is incredible to see all of this with this thing open. Now, there are a couple of interesting items worth pointing out back here. One is the exhaust in back, this titanium exhaust. You can see it has this very cool blue finish to it. It looks so awesome. And all four exhaust pipes kind of come together right in the middle, and then they shoot out the back in the middle, delivering the amazing sound that this car has. It is just incredible to see them from inside as opposed to from outside. Frankly, I think they look a lot cooler in here. Now, the other interesting thing, like I mentioned, this engine was borrowed from Mercedes AMG, and Pagani doesn't try and hide that, unlike in the new Aston Martin Vantage, where they're trying to cover up its AMG roots. Instead, Pagani allows AMG to be displayed prominently on the side of the engine, and you have the AMG logo right in the center of the engine, along with the plaque of the person who built the engine, just like you have in an AMG car. Now, a couple of other interesting items worth noting back here. One is Horacio Pagani's signature on the back under the engine compartment on this flat piece of carbon fiber. The owner told me a lot of the owners have him sign the cars here because it's like a nice flat piece. It doesn't sort of get in the way, but it's also really cool when you go to look at it to see Pagani's signature. That is a cool little detail. Another cool little detail, there's storage back here. If you open up this carbon fiber covered compartment back here, you will see it is a storage compartment for perfectly fitted leather Pagani luggage. And of course, the luggage is absolutely beautiful. There is one of these compartments on both sides, and when you buy one of these cars, you get luggage for either side in the back. So not only do you have an engine back here, an exhaust, suspension, but you also have storage. Who knew? Next up, a few other items worth noting around back. One is the fuel door. How do you put fuel in a Pagani Huayra? Well, it turns out it's just this little fuel door right here that's sort of integrated into the engine cover. You just open it up, and then you put fuel in it. It's really not all that crazy. Of course, the top of the fuel cap is yet another Pagani oval shape. Now, next up, one other absolutely amazing Huayra detail that I bet you didn't know about. Now, when you're inside the car and you're looking at the door panel, you can see there's this little hinged storage area that you can't actually access from the inside. So what's the deal with that? Well, to access it, you open the door, and then the panel is right here. You pop it open, and it is a toolkit. They have one of these on either side. It's like the jack, the tire changing kit. But either way, you're supposed to access it from the outside of the car, not from the inside of the car, even though it is built into the door panel. That is a crazy, interesting little Easter egg. Next up, one other interesting item in the back, two actually. In addition to all of this craziness back here with the four exhaust pipes and the carbon fiber everywhere and the little wings and the grills for heat, you also have two rather interesting regulatory items. At the very base, you see there's a rear fog light. That's mandated in Europe. People in Europe use it when it's gray, foggy, rainy out, and so it's on there. Right above the rear fog light, you can see the backup camera. The backup camera wasn't a government mandate when this car was made, but they put it in anyway because visibility is obviously a bit of a challenge, and they figured most of their customers would want a backup camera. And of course, while I'm back here, it would be a crime to film a video about this car and not show off its exhaust notes. So take a listen. Next up, moving closer to the front, time to cover two interesting items up here. One is this. It is a little Pagani oval, once again. And inside of it, there's another little Pagani oval. And you can see that on this piece, you have the side turn signal. Usually, most automakers place that little side-mounted turn signal on the mirrors, but the mirrors in this car are rather unique. In fact, they're very special. Now, if you look at them, apparently they were intended to be designed to resemble the eyelash or the eyelid of a woman. Apparently, Horacio Pagani said he wanted the eyelid of the woman to be looking back at him as he drove the car. And so you can kind of see the eyelid, and maybe the eye itself is the mirror. It is a very cool look, these mirrors coming off the fenders. One other interesting mirror item is that they fold. Obviously, these mirrors stick out. They're carbon fiber. The housing, they're very expensive. And so you you can fold them in. You're supposed to fold them forward so that they don't get in the way of the door opening. So if you park this car on a narrow street, you can fold your mirrors in. Now, finally, we move on to the front compartment in this car. And if you look at the front compartment, you can see once again, it appears to be held in place solely by a leather strap. But if you open the door, once again, you will notice that there is the leather strap there holding it in place, but once again, there's also one of these little red clips that is actually keeping it in place when you're going high speed. Now, once again, if you undo the leather strap, as I have on both sides, and pull up on those red tabs, as I have on both sides, you can do this with just one person, although this piece is a lot more flimsy than the back, and that's because it's not really intended to be opened all that often. It is not a trunk, as you might think it is. Instead, it's just sort of a front piece. And even though this isn't a trunk, meaning you'll probably never really open it unless you're showing off your car's quirks and features in a video, you can see they've finished everything in this beautiful carbon fiber. This is something that will rarely be opened, but it still has to look good. One thing that really looks good is like the structure for the front clip to stay up. You can see the hydraulics and the hinges, and it just looks really cool when it's in the up position and you're looking at that stuff. And that leads us to our final interesting quirk on the outside, which is how this car looks when it is in this state. This is one of the craziest cars on the road already with all of its bodywork in place, but with everything up and the car basically exploded like this, it somehow looks even crazier. This is just about as insane of an image as you'll get from basically any vehicle. I promise you that your Honda CR-V does not open up like this. And finally, we move back inside for the final quirks and features, and those would be in the infotainment system. Now, as you might expect, Pagani doesn't exactly have some crazy infotainment system. This car is mostly about driving, and they're a kind of a small boutique manufacturer, but there are two rather interesting quirks in this infotainment system. One is the ambient lighting. Now, as you can see, you go into the ambient lighting and you can change the color of the ambient lights in the interior. That's not all that unusual. Most cars do that. The weird thing is it also changes the color of like the lights inside the gauge cluster and the dials. You can change from any different color, and so your speed readout can be pink one day or blue the next day or red the next day. I've seen a lot of cars that let you change ambient lighting color, but not too many let you change that. And the ambient lighting color changing gets even weirder than that, because you can also set it to cycle through all of the colors. Pagani calls it chromatherapy. You can select chromatherapy and then it will cycle through the colors, and while it does it, you can even choose how fast it cycles through the colors. Do you want slow chromatherapy or do you want fast chromatherapy? You want the colors to cycle very quickly. You get to choose that. That is one of the coolest and strangest quirks of any car that has ambient lighting colors that you can change. The other interesting item in the infotainment system, you'll notice if you've hung with me this far, that I haven't shown you the mirror controls yet. That's because the mirror controls are hidden in the infotainment system. You change the mirrors in the infotainment screen, and check this out. When you go to change them, it actually resembles the shape of the mirrors, one on each side, and you press these arrows and they move the mirrors exactly how you tell it to. And that is a very unusual quirk of the Pagani Huayra infotainment system. And so those are the many quirks and features of the Pagani Huayra. But you're probably wondering, what's it like to drive a car like this? Well, now it's time to find out. Okay, driving the Huayra. This is crazy. The driving position is just unlike basically anything that I've driven before. You've got all these gauges and everything is so beautiful and so totally alien, but then you have this window above you that's just totally insane. Very few cars have this. The feel of shifting is surprisingly good. Obviously you're not going through the gears like this and there's no clutch pedal, but they perfectly replicated that feel that you get from shifting a gated shifter. The car feels surprisingly mechanical. Primarily it's the transmission that feels mechanical. You can feel it downshift as we go down and slow down into first gear for a stoplight. Sitting at that stoplight, it does, I mean, you hear more than you would in like a R8 or something like that. It's definitely more of a serious car. And as you accelerate, you really hear behind you everything. This is no Bentley. This is a true exotic sports car, a hypercar, and you never forget it when you're in this car. It doesn't matter where you look, you never forget you're not in a regular car. I mean, the mirrors are like the saving grace. You can see everything, and that one is perfectly positioned. The one on the passenger side is a little bit interrupted by the A-pillar over there, but generally speaking, the mirrors actually provide tremendously good visibility. Listen to that! That's amazing. You can hear the turbos so distinctly. Obviously, the steering is really good. It's very precise. I assume you'd have to really get it on a track and really feel it in order to know what it's capable of. But I definitely feel that the steering is very precise and the turn-in is very good. It's amazing. You can see pretty well. It's not like a terrible supercar from the old days where you can't see anything. It's also comfortable in here. The seat feels reasonably comfortable. There is a little bit of a trick to driving it. You kind of have to let off the throttle when you pull the paddle or when you pull for the next gear in order to get a really smooth shift out of it. The car feels very stable. Driving it like this, it's not bumpy, it's not shaky, nothing's rattling, it doesn't feel like the whole thing's about to come apart. Sometimes when you drive a car from a really low volume manufacturer, you feel that way. Not this thing. This thing feels every bit as stable as you want it to. Wow. Oh my God. Oh my God. Wow, that's crazy. You can definitely tell it's that AMG V12, that twin turbo V12. It has a similar feel that the SL65. Oh my God, that feels every bit Chiron fast, 812 super fast. The Chiron is incredibly fast, but I just keep thinking that it was so luxurious while it delivered the power. There's a benefit to that. But this car, with the gears kind of slamming into the next gear with all that noise behind you, this car really feels like you are actually just flying. Man, the sensation of speed in this car is closer to the very best of any car I've ever driven. You feel it, you hear it, you can see it coming. You're close to the road, so it's right there in front of you. It's hard to describe that level of speed. It just comes on so incredibly fast. It is interrupted only by the shifts. But the thing about the shifts is they're not as quick as a dual clutch, but they are incredibly smashing. They smash you back in your seat. And so the shift kind of takes a break, but then it pushes you back almost even more than the acceleration. Everything. You don't need a roller coaster if you have one of these. That is just about the angriest sounding and feeling car that I've ever been in. It's not just about, it is. And so that's the Pagani Huayra. The Pagani freaking Huayra. This car is so amazing and so special and so beautiful and so insane to drive and so full of so many cool quirks and features. I could probably make 3 videos on it. And I know this one has run rather long, but I think you'll agree that it's worth it. And after watching this, maybe you'll agree that the Huayra is worth every bit of $3 million. Anyway, now it's time to give it a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Huayra is beautiful, not quite perfect, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Handling is incredible, as you may expect from a car like this, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Fun factor is truly amazing. The car is an absolute blast to drive, and it truly feels like you're unleashing a monster or a beast on the world, and it gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, cool factor is obvious. This is one of the coolest cars on the road today, and it gets a 10 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 49 out of 50, which is the highest weekend score of any car ever. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. It doesn't have the traditional luxury items you might associate with spending this much for a car, but it has a lot of other cool stuff that nobody even offers, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Comfort is fine, about average for a car like this, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Quality is excellent. The interior is truly beautiful, and my only concerns would be long-term dependability and parts availability, considering its limited production. It gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is obvious. It's hilariously impractical and intentionally so, and it gets a 1 out of 10. Finally, there's value. It's ridiculously expensive, but the value only seems to be going up. I could never pay this much for a car, but someday we may laugh at how you used to be able to get one of these for only $3 million. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 22 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 71 out of 100, and here's how it stacks up against some of the greatest cars ever made. It beats them all out on the weekend categories, but only by 1 point. But the 918 Spider and the Chiron are just a little bit more daily drivable than the Huayra, so it's not the all-time leader, but it's close.